Hey everybody, welcome back to C.Dat.Guy Review Movies. My name is Christian, and today I'll be reviewing The Rise of Skywalker. But this time we'll be getting into spoiler territory, so if you haven't seen the movie yet and you don't want it spoiled, go ahead and stop the video. If you want to see my non-spoiler review, go ahead and click my previous video with the blue background, and there's your last warning. If you have seen the movie and you want to know my opinions, or you just don't care, then here we go. So there was a character reveal / character choice that kind of made me go, what? And the audience laugh a little bit. At the very beginning of the movie, it said that the Resistance is getting help from a mole in the First Order, and it turns out that General Hux was the spy. I would have taken this scene a little more seriously if it wasn't so goofy, because in The Force Awakens, I thought General Hux was a very good villain type, especially after that speech he gave on Starkiller Base, and it was clear that he was competing for power with Kylo Ren under Snoke's approval. And then in The Last Jedi, they kind of turned him into like someone he could push around, and also him falling for Poe Dameron's jokes at the very beginning. Like, he became less of a threat, and then in this movie, he continues to be this kind of pushover, and pretty much it just turned him into a joke. And his reason for betraying the First Order was, I don't care if the Resistance wins, I just want Kylo Ren to lose. So yeah, it was a bit petty. General Hux tries to play it off, but he ends up getting killed by the First Order anyways. So though he wasn't really the main villain, I just thought this was an okay but a weird send-off. In a parallel scene, we see Rey and Kylo Ren still doing their Force Bond, Force Skype, Force timing, whatever it is from The Last Jedi. But what I liked this time around is that it was kind of interesting to see them pull different objects into each other's locations, kind of like A Nightmare on Elm Street. But anyway, it leads up to the scene where they actually see each other face to face, and then Kylo Ren tells her that she is a Palpatine. At the fan screening I went to, I think some people were shocked, some people liked it, but then again, a majority of the people were silent, so I don't know really how they took it. But when I went to the second screening, a lot of people were laughing at it. For me, I had like a bit of mixed feelings about Rey being a Palpatine. After The Force Awakens came out, there were so many Rey and Snoke theories out there. Some thought that she was obviously Luke's daughter. Others thought that maybe she was the long-lost daughter of Han and Leia, and they just didn't want to say anything to her. Some thought that she was related to Kylo Ren somehow. And then the craziest theory I thought was that, hey, maybe she's a clone. And I was glad that none of those theories came true. After watching a majority of these theories and listening to a lot of Star Wars shows like Jedi Council, the Rey theory that stuck to me the most was that she was a Palpatine. I was convinced of the theory just because of the way she fought Kylo Ren in the first movie. She has the same attack pattern as Palpatine, where she kind of like holds the lightsaber back and then jabs it forward, and also has kind of like this face and really like shows her teeth. Like, that's the way she attacks, and that's the way Palpatine attacked in Revenge of the Sith. A lot of people have been saying that Rey is pretty much like a Mary Sue because she can do anything without problem, and I get that, but now that we know that she's a Palpatine, it would make sense because Palpatine was the strongest Sith we've ever seen on screen before, so it would make sense that she has all that power because it came from him. There were a lot of people, even me included, that thought it would be an interesting idea to see Rey turn to the dark side. But of course, since, she is the first female Jedi hero for this franchise, we knew that Disney wouldn't let that happen. The downside of this reveal meant that the universe, story-wise, was shrunken down to good and evil as Palpatine versus Skywalker once again, except the roles are reversed. And this was a bummer for me because it was assumed in The Last Jedi that she wasn't really related to anyone to the dark side or the light side, and it's just that the Force chose her to have these powers. And I know not a lot of people like that, but to me it was an interesting take. I still like the reveal overall because, well, especially because of the hint that was given early in the movie where we see Rey use Force Lightning for the first time. I thought that was pretty awesome, and it was also shocking. But that's... Oh, and on a quick side note, everyone from the first and second screening was shocked when they thought Rey killed Chewbacca with the Force Lightning. I honestly don't know if people would have liked the movie better if Chewbacca stayed dead or not, but I was relieved to hear him roar. And when I did watch it a second time, there were in fact two transports. And Rey being Palpatine kind of left me with one main question: who was Rey's grandmother? They showed Rey's parents, and we see that Rey's father is the son of Palpatine. So it's like, how did he have time to find a son? Who did he do it with? Was it an off screen relationship? Or maybe he had the ability to create life, just like Darth Plagueis did in Revenge of the Sith, as was strongly implied, was his master. And come to think of it, it would make sense how he would survive all these years, because he had the ability to create life, and he also knew how to save himself from dying. And you know what? Now it makes more sense that Rey had that ability to heal. Let's take a break from them and go to the other characters. I personally didn't like that Rose Tico was sidelined, and I understand why. It's because her Canto Bite sequence with Finn was pretty much wasted in The Last Jedi, and she's faced a lot of backlash and scrutiny for the role. But come on, it wasn't her fault. She wasn't the problem. It was the story problem. But I guess they didn't really want to develop the relationship between her and Finn because, yeah, it did feel forced. And I think it was clear that Finn still had a thing for Rey. I guess Jaina was a good substitute for Rose because just like Finn, she defected from the First Order and she could keep up with him, and it was nice to see that they got to do a lot of stuff in the second half of the movie together. I really didn't know how they're going to use General Leia in this movie. I know originally she was supposed to have a bigger part, but when Carrie Fisher tragically passing away, I knew they just had to do the best with the footage they already had. Understanding those limitations, I was fine with how they used her, and I really appreciated the flashback sequence to show that she does indeed know how to use a lightsaber. Seeing Lando back was nice, and I was really glad they didn't kill him off, and I thought it was a nice touch that they gave him the "I have a bad feeling about this" line. And on that planet where they find Lando, we see that the aliens are celebrating the Festival of Ancestors. I thought it was a nice nod to the franchise by saying they celebrated it every 42 years. I liked the dynamic between Zori Bliss and Poe Dameron, and even though we didn't get to see Kerry Russell's face, I thought she did a good job with the role. And it's clear that they had some history together, something fun, but I guess we want to see that story. We'll have to see it play out another time. Like I said in my last video, the first half of the movie moves at a very fast pace, and I guess the second act starts when Rey's revealed to be a Palpatine, and then our heroes go on a journey to the remains of the second Death Star. And we do get one interesting moment where she gets to see her dark double when she's fighting the Wayfinder, and we know it's reminiscent of Luke seeing Vader from The Empire Strikes Back. And then we get to see Kylo and Rey fight one more time. I don't know, I just didn't really feel any stakes during this lightsaber fight because even though Sidious initially wanted Kylo Ren to, find her and kill her, we see that he changes his mind for some reason, say like, oh, bring the girl to me. Sure, we see Rey beating Kylo Ren by stabbing him after General Leia sacrifices herself to distract him for a moment, but then she goes ahead and heals him. Probably out of pity that he just lost his mom, or because she wanted to see Ben Solo again. But then she takes his ship and flies away back to Acto to exile herself. And then immediately after that, we have a scene where I admit I didn't understand at first, but when I watched it the second time, it made more sense. So it was Han Solo coming back. Kylo Ren is talking to him, and I thought it was a Force ghost at first, but that wouldn't make sense because I know Han's not Force sensitive. But it was just a memory that Kylo Ren had. I know for a lot of people it was like, we can't redeem Kylo, he killed his own father. Which, once again, I get, but I thought it was a nice touch that they used essentially the same dialogue from The Force Awakens and then restructure it so that Kylo Ren redeems himself. Something that I forgot to mention in the non-spoiler review is that's actually worth saying something that I want to say now so I don't forget is having once again the legendary John Williams at the helm with his music. Whenever there was a character introduction or a scene paying homage to any of the other Star Wars movies, the score matched perfectly. When the Resistance comes in, we can hear their march. When we see General Leia in a scene, we can hear her theme. When Luke is lifting his X-Wing out of the water, we can hear the exact same music that was from The Empire Strikes Back when Yoda was lifting his X-Wing out of the water back on Dagobah. And even in closing, it was nice to hear Rey's theme one last time as she was heading down to Luke's home in Tatooine. If I can hear any piece of his music, I can just close my eyes and immediately picture exactly which scene is going on. That's how memorable his music was. So I just want to give out a shout out to John Williams once again. Thank you for your legendary music, and congratulations on your 52nd Oscar nomination. But getting to the third act, there were three moments that sent chills down my spine and happened back to back to back. The first moment pretty much felt like an Avengers Endgame moment because we see the Resistance fighters getting destroyed one by one, and they don't know what to do. They're running out of time, they're running out of options, and just when Poe is about to lose hope, we hear Lando's voice and we see the Millennium Falcon, and not just that, we see a huge fleet of Resistance fighters from all around the galaxy, just like in the trailer. Essentially, they're supposed to be there in order to destroy a legion of Star Destroyers and their planet-destroying cannons, but we don't really get to see them in action besides a couple of ships. But it was nice to see Wedge again. And the second awesome moment happened right after that, which I like to call the Palpatine sequence. And so we see the Emperor use this kind of power, which I guess this is how he stays alive, to drain the life force of Ben Solo and Rey, and he gains more power, he regenerates his body, and then he summons the largest force lightning I've ever seen on screen. I guess they call it specifically a force storm. This essentially stops the Resistance fleet from attacking his Star Destroyers, and it was a cool visual. The only downside to it is that he didn't shout unlimited power like in Revenge of the Sith. And finally, the third moment that was awesome was seeing Rey calling out to the Jedi and the Force as a callback to her very first scene in the movie. And hearing those voices again, whether it was Anakin Skywalker, Qui-Gon Jinn, Ahsoka Tano, and even both versions of Obi-Wan Kenobi, just really made me happy. And I guess this also showed that Mace Windu was on the right track to beat Palpatine back in Revenge of the Sith. All he needed was one more lightsaber, because that's exactly what Rey does. She takes both Luke's and Leia's lightsabers to destroy Palpatine once and for all. Though I like the majority of the third act, like I said in my non-spoiler video, there was a moment I didn't really care for. So after Rey destroys Palpatine, despite how much power she used and all her might, she does die herself. And we already see Ben Solo redeem himself by throwing away his red lightsaber. He does have a short, cool fight sequence with the Knights of Ren, who I guess were overhyped just like Captain Phasma. He doesn't die when, Palpatine throws him away. And he comes back and he sees that Rey is dead, and I guess he has the power to heal too. Maybe it's part of that dyad thing. And so he heals Rey, and then they kiss before he dies and becomes one with the Force. Yeah, I was never really on board with Reylo. I understand that the building blocks of this relationship was established in The Last Jedi through their Force bonding, but to me it wasn't developed enough in order to really earn this scene. And if you really look back at the trilogy, they spend more time fighting than building a relationship. And if I recall, it said in The Last Jedi that Snoke was the one that established the Force bond between them because he was spying on them. And if Snoke was really Palpatine, then doesn't that mean Palpatine should still be in control of whether they can Force bond or not? Or maybe they threw that away. Maybe it is a continuity error, but whatever. At the fan screening, about a third of the audience liked it based on the amounts of gasps and squeals I'd heard, or maybe the Reylo fans were just really loud. And then at the second screening, it just got laughed at. And for me, I was just glad that wasn't the final scene. I did like that our heroes reunited at the end. It was just nice seeing Rey, Finn, and Poe with that group hug. You know what? We do see Chewbacca suffer the most of this trilogy, where, we see how he reacts when Han dies. We know how he feels after Luke died, and then his reaction when he figured out that Leia died. Man, he suffered so much. But I guess I cheer him up with his hero's medal at the end. Bringing the final scene back to Tatooine was a nice touch because it just comes full circle. This is where the franchise started, and this is where it ends. For now, I do like that we get to see her yellow lightsaber, which is the color I really hoped that she would get, and she got it. And then we hear the name Rey Skywalker, which is what a lot of people were predicting since The Force Awakens, but even though she's not Luke's daughter, she does adopt the last name as she sees Luke and Leia's Force ghosts, and then we see the final shot of her watching the binary sunset with one of my new favorite characters, BB-8. As I said, this movie had a lot of fan service, but how you perceive them is up to you. While there were a couple of missteps in the story personally, I do think that there were enough great moments to make this still a fun experience. And watching it a second time definitely helped me liking this movie better. But where does this movie stand against the rest of the franchise? Well, let's start the ranking. Starting at the bottom of the 12 Star Wars movies is Star Wars The Clone Wars. This is the only movie I didn't rewatch prior to watching The Rise of Skywalker. And I think some people don't really count it because it's animated, and probably because people didn't even really see it. But since it was technically released in theaters, then it does count. And it really is not that good. I understand that this is really the pilot to the Star Wars Clone Wars series, but I don't think this is a good way to do it. I think they should have just started with the show. The show is much better. At number 11 is Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. Despite major important plot points happening throughout the movie, the chemistry between Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman wasn't there. On their own, Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala are great characters, but their dialogue and their scenes together were just so bad. It's honestly why I struggle watching this over and over. You know, there's something wrong when watching Palpatine's rise to political power is more interesting, but not everything is bad. I did like the fight scenes between Obi-Wan and Jango on Kamino and in space, and then of course the third act between the Jedi and the clones fighting all of the droids, and of course the lightsaber fights between Yoda, Anakin, Obi-Wan versus Count Dooku is what made the movie bearable. At number 10 is Solo: A Star Wars Story, and there was just so much that happened behind the scenes, whether it's the directors dropping out in favor of another one, or them having to reshoot about 90% of this movie, or whatever it may be. I was just surprised that this movie came out to be fine. The cast was great, the story was okay, but overall, it wasn't needed. And even after rewatching this, I can't really tell you if there was any standout memorable scenes. So even though the acting was better than Attack of the Clones, because it's not really that memorable, this is where I have to put it. At number 9 is Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace. And yeah, some of the acting is just as bad as Attack of the Clones. And yes, I agree that Anakin and Jar Jar Binks are annoying, but please, you don't have to bully the actors over it. But on the flip side, Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor do a great job as the Jedi leads of Qui-Gon Jinn and a younger Obi-Wan Kenobi. Natalie Portman also shows she can handle herself as Queen of Naboo. And yes, this movie has my favorite lightsaber duel of all time. Even after rewatching the franchise again, nothing can beat it. We have Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Darth Maul. And from that, we get the great score of Duel of Fates. And who doesn't love that? Along with the pod race scene in the middle of the movie, makes this movie worth it for me. At number 8, this is where I'm going to have to put Star Wars Episode 9 The Rise of Skywalker. You guys already have my feelings on it, both spoiler and non-spoiler, but this movie does still leave me with questions like, does this mean the Sith's rule of 2 have a different meaning now? What was Finn going to say to Rey when they thought they were going to die? And finally, and the most important question, how did Maz Kanata get Luke's lightsaber? At number 7 is Star Wars Episode 8 The Last Jedi. I understand this movie was divisive, but for me, I ended up liking it than most people. This is where I believe that Adam Driver really starts to shine as Kylo Ren and Ben Solo, so that I'm just not looking at him as this like temper tantrum kid that just swings his lightsaber whenever he's angry. I do agree that Rian Johnson could have probably done a couple things different so that his ideas can come across better. Like, for example, how about having Luke throw the lightsaber at Rey's feet rather than throwing it over his shoulder? Because I remember when I saw that for the first time, some people were confused and some people thought it was funny, even though it probably should have been more serious. And I think he could have done something better for Snoke in terms of, you know, it was dumb that Snoke couldn't sense that Kylo Ren was going to kill him instead of Rey. And I think just like that, at the time it seemed like, oh, there goes everyone's Snoke theory because he's dead now. However, I did think his take on Luke was interesting. Just because, well, as he aged 30 years, maybe he doesn't always want to be the hero. And I also like that he portrayed Luke criticizing the Jedi because it was a conversation that a friend and I had, that if the Jedi were so good, how did they not see the Emperor rising among their ranks? I thought that was pretty interesting. And yes, I agree that the cancel bite sequences were a waste of time and didn't really help Finn and Rose develop. Watching Kylo and Rey fight against the Praetorian Guards was pretty cool. And then my favorite scene was Holdo light speeding through the First Order fleet. At number 6 is Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. And I know I'll probably get criticized for putting it this low, but for me, this movie still gets an 8.5 out of 10. While it does bring the original trilogy to a satisfying close, there were some things I still didn't like about it. For example, I thought the second Death Star was a lazy idea because it was basically bringing back the same kind of final battle from A New Hope. When I was rewatching this movie, I noticed that maybe it was Harrison Ford. He made Han Solo a bit cheesier with the line delivery. Go ahead and rewatch again if you don't believe me. And I'm not a big fan of the Ewoks. Yes, they're cute, but you know what? The Empire doesn't really seem like a threat when they can be taken out by little bears. Still, the Battle of Endor is one of the coolest space battles I've ever seen, and combining that with the second lightsaber duel between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader is one of the most satisfying third acts, and it's one of the great moments in Star Wars lore. Alright, now we're into the top 5, and just as a side note, my 3, 4, and 5 can change places depending on how I feel, but for now, my number 5 is going to have to go to Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. And this is a surprise to me because for the longest time, this was my number 4. This was the first Star Wars movie that I got to watch in theaters, and the battle over Coruscant is, in my opinion, the best opening of all the movies, and I just really love Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Hayden Christensen does a better job at being Anakin Skywalker than in Attack of the Clones, but finally seeing Palpatine become the fully fleshed villain Darth Sidious is what really escalated the movie. The only criticism I can really give is that Padme is a great character. We see that established in The Phantom Menace, and she does get developed a little further in Attack of the Clones. But here, I'm wondering, maybe it's because she's pregnant in this movie, she really takes a back seat. And the dialogue between her and Anakin is still pretty bad. But the lightsaber fights, the war, the rise of the Emperor were just excellent. Those 3 words, execute Order 66, destroyed my 13-year-old heart in the theater, and it was really just sad watching all the Jedi die. But because there were actual stakes in this movie, it was a great way to end the prequel trilogy. At number 4 is Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Who knew that this small little detail from the very first floating paragraph of the very first movie would make such an entertaining adventure? Though this movie plays into the main Star Wars story, it was a great idea for a spin-off. This emphasized the war part of Star Wars. You had this small band of rebels who had a little bit of a backstory, and they became this team that you really cared about, or at least I did. The Empire was actually a threat, and the Battle of Scarif is probably my favorite action sequence of all the Star Wars movies. The third act was full of awesome space and land battles. You had a couple nice cameos from the very first movie. I like Donnie Yen's action sequences also. And of course, that Vader scene. You know which one I'm talking about. It felt like watching episode 3 all over again because you see these rebels, you see these heroes fight really hard and then they die, which is heartbreaking, but ultimately it's for the sacrifice of the Rebel Alliance. The first half of the movie did have a bit of a slow start, but besides that, I can't really complain about this movie. At number 3 is Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. I know some of you might think I'm ranking this too high, but this was definitely thanks to one of my favorite movie going experiences ever. It was just me and my brother standing in a very long line, and despite the freezing December cold, I was just happy to have Star Wars back in my life, and I could tell that everyone in line was so hyped. I understand the criticisms that it's pretty much like a remake of A New Hope, but that didn't really bother me much. I really like seeing the new characters of Rey, Kylo Ren, Finn, and BB-8 mixed with the returning characters like Han, Leia, Chewie, C-3PO, R2-D2, and of course the special appearance of Luke Skywalker at the end. The only thing I really didn't like was this thing right here, Starkiller Base, because it was just like another Death Star again, except larger. That's really my only criticism because I really like the adventure we went on. I did like how we got to see Kylo Ren holding a blaster during a conversation with Poe Dameron, and just that lightsaber fight at the end between Finn and Rey versus Kylo Ren, it gave me chills. I just really like the balance of new and old things. Okay, and just as a note, this is not a cop out. Number 2 and number 1 can switch based on my mood, but for now, I put at number 2 Star Wars Episode 5 The Empire Strikes Back. This is classic Star Wars, whether it's the Battle of Hoth, you see Luke training with Yoda on Dagobah, or the Millennium Falcon trying to outrun the Empire. The story is definitely a bit darker, and we get introduced to the Imperial March for the first time, which is a fitting theme to the triumph of the Empire. The movie moved a bit slower, but this allowed for great character development in Luke, Leia, and Han, and we also got to meet some new interesting characters along the way, like Yoda and Lando Calrissian. And of course, the first lightsaber fight between Luke and Darth Vader is absolutely fantastic, and that plot twist, no, I am your father, legendary, which means my number 1 is Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. The movie that started it all is my favorite. This is the classic hero's journey that unfolds into one of the greatest movies of all time. I always wonder what it's like to be at that screening back in 1977 when you see those floating paragraphs, John Williams' triumphant score, and seeing a blockade runner being chased by a Star Destroyer. I don't think the world was prepared for what George Lucas had to offer. We all relate to Luke Skywalker as someone who wanted to find something more out of life, to find adventure. And we get introduced to iconic characters like Obi-Wan Kenobi, C-3PO, R2-D2, Han Solo and Chewbacca, Princess Leia, and Darth Vader. Sneaking around on the Death Star and watching the X-Wing do their trench runs was so gripping and had me on the edge of my seat the first time I watched it. And this movie has one of my favorite scenes of all time. And though it's short, I don't know, there's just something about it that always gets me. It's watching Luke Skywalker staring out into the binary sunset and listening to John Williams' Force theme. It always gives me a sense of hope and wonder. And yeah, that's how I feel about that movie, and for now, that's my number 1. So, there's my spoiler review and the ranking of the Star Wars franchise. What do you think? Do you agree or do you disagree? And then maybe also you can answer this question if you want. Was it a good idea for Disney to buy this franchise, or do you think they should have left it alone? Just let me know in the comment section down below. Go ahead and give this video a thumbs up or a thumbs down, I don't really care. But if you want to see more movie reviews from this guy, just click the subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, and may the Force be with you. Always.